Welcome. On behalf of St. John's and our Racial Justice and Equity Committee, I thank all of you for coming today to our forum on the campaign to end solitary confinement. My name is Chris Files, and I'm a parishioner here at St. John's. One of the great things about St. John's are the many social justice committees addressing problems like racial justice, refugee resettlement, food insecurity, and books in prisons. Before I introduce our terrific panel, a few words about logistics and the format for today's program. Coffee and pastries are on the table in the back of the room, and outside in the hallway, decaf coffee and tea are available. Please help yourselves. There's a bathroom after exiting the parish hall on the right, just after the steps. The forum will end promptly at 11. Reverend Morrow will start the forum with a prayer. Jessica Sandoval, National Director of the Unlock the Box campaign to end solitary confinement, will speak first about the campaign's work around the country to end solitary confinement. She will be followed by Chris Wilson, who will tell us of his personal experience in prison and in solitary confinement. Reverend Morrow will wrap up the discussion and talk about her work with faith communities across the country to end torture and solitary confinement. The panelists will speak for 30 to 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A with the audience. If you can't hear the speakers, please give a thumbs up. In the back corners of the room, on the right and the left, there are two taped outlines of a 6x9 solitary cell, each with a virtual reality headset you can put on to experience for a few minutes life in solitary confinement. There's a chair in each of the boxes. It's like a small box, and we encourage you to sit because it can be disorienting when you put on the headset. Now, to briefly introduce our panel. Our first speaker, Jessica Sandoval, is the National Director of the Unlock the Box campaign to end solitary confinement. The campaign started in 2018. She has 25 years' experience working to reform youth and adult justice systems and has used her advocacy expertise to build campaigns to end solitary confinement in 22 states and DC. Our second speaker, Chris Wilson, grew up in Washington, DC, amid poverty, drug addiction, and gun violence. At age 14, a young boy, he spent over 3 months in solitary confinement. At age 17, he was sentenced to life in prison after killing a man in self-defense. While serving his sentence, he drafted a personal master plan, a list of goals and ambitions that guided his transformation, including education, languages, and social entrepreneurship. After 16 years incarcerated, at age 33, he was released and went on to become a successful social entrepreneur and author. Reverend T.C. Morrow will wrap up the presentation. She is an ordained deacon in the United Methodist Church and co-founder of the National Religious Campaign Against Torture, known as NEARCAT. It was founded in 2006. Reverend Morrow helps mobilize faith communities across the country to end solitary confinement, torture, and other inhumane practices, advancing a vision of dignity and justice for all people. I'll turn it over now to the panel.
They won't let you board with me?
I don't know.
Yeah, how about
5 years on and we're still all learning our Zoom etiquette. I offer a prayer to open our time together this morning, adapted from a prayer by Reverend Jerry Stinson of California. In advance of Torture Awareness Month in June of 2014, NEARCAT and partners issued a national call for people of faith to compose and share prayers for all who remain in conditions of solitary confinement, and in remembrance of the significance of the 1-year anniversary of the historic peaceful hunger strike throughout California prisons, which had begun in July 8th, 2013, and followed on others in prior years. But the strike in 2013 included more than 30,000 incarcerated people participating. Let us pray. God, who sees and knows all, may those in solitary believe, indeed know in the hidden recesses of their hearts, that there are many of us who are working to bring their hidden stories into view. May this bring them encouragement. May they feel in their souls that there are indeed thousands of us who feel in our souls a deep and sharp pain for all they endure. May they feel and may they know that there are thousands of us who care for them, who are fighting for them, and who have not forgotten and will not forget them. Dearest God, source of life of every one of us, every parent and every child, console the hearts, encourage the spirits, and strengthen the resolve of the friends and families of those in isolation. May they and their loved ones in isolation know that in their struggle, they are not alone. Gracious God, be with all of those who have endured solitary and provide care and community so that they might thrive. Empower those who choose to become advocates, sharing from their own experience and working for change. O God of justice, we pray for your wisdom for elected leaders and for those who lead and staff places of confinement and incarceration. O God, in a time when too many in our country seek to stoke fear and division, help us gathered here today at St. John's open ourselves to be vessels of your love and open our hearts to the information that will be shared this morning. May you help us every day to recall that every person is made in your image, O God, and help each of us to be part of feeding those who are hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, welcoming the stranger, clothing those who need clothes, caring for the sick, and visiting those who are imprisoned. Oh God, bless our time together this morning. Amen. Showing
It's never quiet, ever. People yelling and screaming and arguing and banging. It was like hell, man. I have seen solitary confinement break people.
You'll see them open the door. You could clearly tell they were laughing at her. The last thing I seen was my sister in a body bag coming out.
There was nothing there in the system that prepared me to come out better. It prepared me to come out bitter. There, but for the grace of God and the wonderful people I had in my life, I would be that person.
The basic thing that humans need is human contact.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having us in your place of worship today. As Chris introduced me, I'm Jessica, and I lead the Unlock the Box campaign. We're a national advocacy campaign with a mission that is pretty simple, but as you can see, very urgent. And it is to end solitary confinement in all carceral facilities. And that includes youth facilities, immigration detention, prisons, jails, even the U.S. Marshals keep people in solitary. So wherever solitary exists, we seek to abolish it. Right now, we're at a very critical moment. You probably know that under this administration, there is a penchant to be cruel and barbaric, and they are finding every way possible to open or put people in places that are built to torture people. And so this current administration has sought out places where it is not a place you would even want to put your most unwanted enemy or any animal should live. So today I want to share a little bit about where we stand nationally, the trends that are shaping this moment, and the wins that we're building on. the opposition we're facing, and what it will take to finish the job. Across the country, there's an estimated 122,000 people. This was a report that we wrote with our colleagues at Solitary Watch a couple years ago, and then it was even a pretty conservative number that we found, and it doesn't include all carceral settings. And I can imagine now, with thousands of people languishing in solitary in these immigrant detention facilities, the number is beginning to rise. These are people who are locked in their cells. If you haven't had a chance to, I really encourage you to go stand in a 6x9 box in the back of the room. That's a cell and sometimes shared with two people. But those are the cell sizes. So you essentially could reach your arms out to touch both sides of the wall. People are languishing in these places for hours a day, but not just per day. It's for weeks and months and years, and as Chris will talk about, decades. The hardest populations that solitary affects the most is the people who are the most vulnerable. So how many people in here believe that solitary confinement is relegated to the worst of the worst? Be honest. It's a myth. Yep. So the reality is that solitary is used every day across this country in every city and state. And the people who are in solitary, staggering statistic, is about 85% of those people are in solitary for what you would consider a very minor infraction or a disobeying of an order. So things like sewing on belt loops to your state issued pants to keep them up, having extra what would we consider contraband in your cell, things like an extra orange or additional stamps or envelopes. There's a pretty famous one called reckless eyeballing that was actually on the books, cheering too loud during a football game. In our friend Anissa's case, whose story is featured on this Windows to Solitary panel on this side, Anissa had just gotten some bad news on a phone call with her daughter. And when she got off the phone, the corrections officer asked her what's wrong. And she did not want to tell this person anything about her personal business. And because of that, she was written up and put into solitary. So it's used without discretion or any real prudence. So it is unfortunately the myth of it being reserved for the worst of the worst just doesn't exist. And we really believe that there is a way to separate people who are having acute mental health crisis or violence without isolating them. So the hardest hit folks are people who are people of color, people suffering from mental illness, pregnant people, people that are part of the LGBTQ community, the elderly, people with disabilities. And for a lot of people, most people, isolation really replaces treatment. And we saw this increase during COVID, where everybody was just being locked down because they didn't know how to separate people who had been infected with COVID with each other. And so they went against what medical advice would tell people, and they went with isolation. And so unfortunately, what we've seen since COVID is these long-term lockdowns across the country, where even people in general population are put in their cells for these many hours, 20 hours or more. We also, as you know, that I just mentioned, having this rapid expansion of solitary in immigrant detention. And what we know right now is there's over 65,000 people in immigrant detention right now, and thousands of them are now in solitary confinement. And they're basically going to solitary in these immigrant detention facilities for things like requesting a medical appointment. We've heard lawyers telling us that people are being coerced into solitary so that they will sign away their rights to be deported to their own country of origin, but to go to a third country in South Sudan or Rwanda or Guatemala, or not Guatemala, El Salvador. So I think, you know, it just shows how terrible solitary is if you use it to coerce people to actually sign away their rights to go to a country that is not of their own. And so I think there's just not a lot of oversight. And there's not a lot of accountability in these very opaque systems. And so part of all of our work is to bring more light to what is happening on the inside by working with people who have experienced solitary, people who are currently incarcerated, to share not only their story, but to have a voice at the table about how policy is made, and working very closely with the legal community, activists, advocates, public health, mental health, and other folks in this country who are working coalition all over the country. We're in the Unlock the Box campaign is in 23 states right now, and we work with folks on the ground to do just that. So essentially, before I move on to what our trends are, just without any national standards, this practice will continue to operate with the impunity that we're seeing now. So despite all of these challenges, we are kind of what I would call in one of the most active reform periods that we've seen in a very long time. We're seeing a widespread adoption of what we call alternatives to solitary, or evidence-based alternatives that reduce violence inside and improve safety. From places in North Dakota, Colorado, and Maine, we are showing that there are humane and therapeutic approaches that really will help people on the inside coming out of solitary, and really encouraging to serve that population so that they can be integrated back into the general population. We are also seeing an increase in the number of states who are taking their voices to the legislature and introducing oversight bills. And in some cases, those oversight bills are what will likely help us implement the laws that we're passing around the country. Because it's one thing to get a bill passed, as many of you may know. It's another to actually have it implemented. And that is really where the rubber hits the road, because we are seeing that in many of the states where we've passed legislation now. It's almost an act of God, if I can say that, to get these bills implemented that really shows what the bill intended and the spirit in which that law was made. We're also kind of in this cultural moment where survivors of solitary, their family members, and people who are incarcerated are really leading this work across the country. And I think because of that, we're seeing public opinion shifting. And the narrative is really, I believe, starting to shift because of these voices that are in these stories. You know, Chris wrote The Master Plan, a book that has gone into probably every prison in this country, that, you know, people are sitting in their cells reading and thinking about how they are going to change their lives and how it can help them get themselves out of their dire situations. And so the voices that are really being channeled, I think, is having a huge impact. We've done a lot of polling on solitary. We started polling in 2012. We have never released a public poll. Just tells you how bad the public think solitary is actually not that bad. I think there's a lot of myths and understanding about what happens in solitary. And it wasn't until 2022 that we got our first poll that actually showed a real narrative change and shift. And so that was the first and only poll we've actually released publicly. So it took over 10 years to really start shifting that perception. And we continue to really just put our foot on the gas, and we're not letting up on the narrative shift, because it's really, we think a tipping point is definitely what would I say, imminent. Um, so I'm sure you all want to hear about the wins, and then I'm going to start closing down my comments. But we have delivered some pretty enormous victories, if I do say so myself. And the thing you should walk away with today is, yes, this is a terrible situation, and there are people working on it, and you all could join us in this endeavor. But also, I think it's important to know that we're actually making some gains and having some pretty momentous wins. So 4 states have long ended what we call long-term solitary, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with the US or the UN Mandela rules, Nelson Mandela rules. Of course you are, Margaret. Anybody else? Chris does her research. So the Mandela rules are essentially a set of what we call kind of soft laws or standards that is what the United Nations have issued. So most countries, not all, really use those as standards in which they operate their prison systems on. You can imagine that the US has not adopted or in compliance at all with these standards. And so our goal as a campaign is really to bring the US into compliance with these standards. And so the standard basically says a lot of things. It's a lot of pages. I encourage you to read it. It's very interesting. But the important piece that we really focus on is that solitary beyond 15 days is considered torture. And so that's, what we are working towards. We like to call our bills Mandela Plus bills because some of our states say 15 days is too long, and we agree. So the less, the better. But having a standard in which this country operates on would be a move in the right direction. So 4 states have done that. Several supermax prisons have been closed because of our campaigns across the country. And that basically, just so you know, supermax prisons are built for isolation. That's exactly why they're built. They're built to have single solitary cells. In fact, when I visited the Colorado supermax that was closed because they moved away from using solitary, the director of the corrections department said to me, we can't actually use this facility for anything else. We can't even try to do programming in here because there isn't any actual physical space in which people can be in any kind of congregate settings. So they had to close the facilities because these new laws basically tell you that, you should have there's a volume button on the bottom, Annalise, on the right side. These laws basically say that people have to be out of their cell for most of the day. And so what do you do with people who are don't have any place to go? So we're seeing those kinds of changes happen, which we're very proud of. And since the inception of our campaign, we've seen over 100 state level policies across the country be enacted that address the issue of solitary in some form or fashion. So maybe it's a data bill, maybe it's an oversight bill, or really aimed at reducing, restricting, or banning solitary. We also had the introduction of our federal bill called the End Solitary Confinement Act, now in the second reintroduction in the 119th Congress. And that act basically would end solitary beyond anything that reflects 4 hours, which would be a de-escalation period. And it would end solitary in all federal facilities, including immigrant detention. And lastly, we launched something entirely new this year, which a few people in this room were able to come out and see, but we launched our Journey to Justice bus tour. And so we refurbished a school bus, they're called Schoolies, and we made it into a mobile museum to show people what solitary is really like, to educate people what solitary is like. And we went to 12 states, we visited 18 communities, we had 32 events, and it was an incredible tour, and I'm hoping that we'll get to do more of that. And if anybody's interested in signing up for the Unlock the Box e-blasts, we have a sign-up sheet, and that's where any of our events or Journey to Justice, our next bus tour, I'm putting that out there so I can manifest the next one, where we will be. So please, please follow us. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to say that because of our wins, we're seeing a ton of opposition rear its ugly head. So they are fighting us tooth and nail on implementation in places, well, in all the places, New York especially. They had a illegal wildcat strike that took place in all but one facility in the state of New York because they refused to implement HALT. As a result, the governor fired 2,000 correction guards because of that illegal strike that lasted 2 months, where they just abandoned their jobs. 7 people died. And it's a shame that more people did not hear about this wildcat strike across the country. There's also just, you know, I said a lack of transparency and data gaps we're trying to fill. And we know that the conditions are worsening. All right, so here's what it's going to take. And then I'm going to pass it over to Chris, because you're going to want to hear from him more than you want to hear from me anyway. It's going to take constituents like you all in this room to put pressure on your legislators to pay attention to this issue. Because Chris, who, can I put you on the spot for a second?
Sure.
You're used to this.
Yes.
Okay. Chris is good friends with the Maryland governor, grew up with Wes Moore, and has remained good friends. And Chris went to the governor and said, we got to do something about this thing in solitary. Now, Chris experienced solitary, and Wes knows this about Chris and knows a lot of people who have been in similar situations. And what did the governor say to you?
He said that he wants to address this issue, and I essentially appealed.
But he said, first, we don't do this.
Yeah. It was just I thought there were laws or statutes where this isn't happening. I said, well, there's no oversight. It's happening. So it's been used as a weapon, a tool in the carceral system to punish people, and he wasn't aware of it that it's happening. It's like, we're not supposed to be doing this.
Exactly. So like our own governor in Maryland had no idea that this was happening, even with people like Chris in their lives. And so it is really important to have a voice in this, to go to your legislators, set up appointments, make this issue known. We are happy to come with you to those calls and meetings. And we have a local coalition and campaign in Maryland, DC, and in Virginia. So if you live in one of those three states, we have active campaigns in each of them. And really just, a sustained investment, both in our work, creating deeper alliances with our community members and across sections. And so this is going to take all of us to end this torturous and barbaric practice of solitary. And so we ask you all to join us in that. And I'm going to let our friend John Oliver take us out of my comments, because I think he does a really much better job than I do at saying exactly what, how many people should be in solitary and what we're going to do about it. Thanks, Lisa.
Our main story tonight concerns solitary confinement. A 2016 government report found that on any given day, an estimated 90,000 inmates in prison and jail are housed in isolation. And that is almost certainly an undercount, given how poor data collection on this is. Human beings are not meant to sit in a bathroom for 10 years with nothing to do. You're thinking of retainers. Those are the things that we place into a bathroom and fully neglect for an entire decade. Everybody knows that. Solitary can irreparably damage people's minds. Putting people in solitary is torture, so let's stop doing it. If you find yourself making the case that you need to torture people to keep your facility safe, that in itself is an admission of catastrophic failure, and you may need to go. Because it is important to remember just how lasting the damage here can be. Solitary isn't something we do to people behind bars. It's something we do to them forever. and it needs to be universally understood how utterly indefensible it is. What is the acceptable number of people to have in solitary confinement? The answer they come up with no hesitation is fucking 0.
Wow. Good morning, everyone. It's strange, right? It's so triggering to speak about this subject and hear about solitary confinement because I unfortunately spent over 100 days in solitary confinement as a juvenile. And I want to start off by like speaking a little bit about my experience in the carceral system. I went to prison. I was sentenced to natural life in prison at the age of 17. And I was defending my mom, who was raped in front of me by a police officer, a DC police officer. And I was thrown away, and I ended up in solitary confinement. Summertime, and there's no AC in prison, at least for us, it wasn't. And, every time I talk about this subject, I think about those days in solitary confinement, just like losing track of the time of day, or if there's sunlight or no human interaction. Torture is the right word for it. And the unfortunate thing about all of this is that 95% of people who are incarcerated will return to our communities. And so I get it. People break the law. I'm all for rule of law and punishment. You break the law, you should be punished. But torture is taking it too far. And if 95% of people who are incarcerated are coming back to our communities, we have to ask ourselves, what type of people do we want to come back into our communities? And the painful fact about solitary confinement is that the scars that are inflicted are invisible. So people will come home and they'll be damaged psychologically, and they're living right beside us. And as taxpayer citizens, you want to get a return on your tax-paying dollars, right? We don't want people being tortured and coming back into our communities. Big surprise, they come back home and like something happens or whatever, and it's because we're doing it, and we need to be preemptive and address these issues. And so I strongly encourage you all to broach this conversation with our representatives and our communities. It endangers the community, this practice. And I as a visual artist and a social justice advocate, I feel like it is my responsibility to speak out against this as much as I can. And I think we just have to do something about it. Like it's not a safe practice, and it's easy when you consider people the others in prison. Oh, they're prison, they convicted felons or whatever, and it's like, yeah, torture them or whatever. It's just not right. It's not right. And I was just texting with the governor, my good friend, Governor Moore of Maryland. And him as a soldier, I was appealing to his humanity. It's like we have to enforce the law, and I'm all for justice, but just not torture. This isn't right. And so I'm strongly appealing to you all that your voices matter, and your representatives. I encourage you all to reach out to them. And oversight, as you mentioned, like oversight is super important. So if you dive deep into this, it's like, oh, we're not supposed to be doing this, or we don't do it, and they call it all kinds of things: administrative segregation, or this is an investigation taking place like for 8 months. What? And people, like family members, are trying to visit people, and it's just like, oh no, they're on administrative segregation. It's like, what does that mean? It's like we throw people away. And we got to put a stop to it. We got to put a stop to it.
Thank you, Chris. My name is Reverend T.C. Morrow, and on the staff of the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. We're a organization of more than 300 religious organizations, including the Episcopal Church, and we're an interfaith organization, and bringing people of faith to movements against torture. We had been founded in 2006 in the wake of the Abu Ghraib photos coming out, and then were involved in what led to the 2009 presidential action ending the CIA torture program post 9/11. And in the years that followed that, we asked ourselves whether or not to continue our work. And we had folks come to us and said, what you've been about is what the US government is doing to people in US custody. And another thing that you should be working on is about the use of solitary confinement in our own prisons and jails and detention centers. The first Supermax in the US was constructed in Philadelphia and opened in 1829. Eastern State Penitentiary opened influenced by the notion of Quakers, who themselves had been influenced by folks including Anglican lay leader John Howard and his 1777 book, The State of Prisons in England and Wales, and others at the time. It's not only the Quakers. I'm a Methodist, and so John Wesley was very involved in the 1700s in rights for incarcerated people, and Anglicans and others were as well. But there was an idea, because prisons were very bad and continue to be bad in similar and different ways. But in that time, in the 1700s and early 1800s, there was the idea that solitude would allow for reflection, which would lead to repentance and therefore moral reform. And this was in contrast to a system of corporal punishment and public humiliation. And the Quakers fused these ideas of the value of solitude with their own theological concept of inner light, and they advocated for what would become the building of the Eastern State Penitentiary. And unfortunately, it was a failed experiment, but one that has had devastating consequences that we just have not learned from. As the Friends Committee on National Legislation noted in a statement submitted for a US Senate hearing on solitary, quote, by 1838, leading Quaker Elizabeth Fry was already speaking out against solitary confinement. She lobbied the British House of Commons, and she traveled in England and Scotland to meet with policymakers and public audiences to call out the dangers of this practice. Even before the fields of psychology and neurology developed, she pointed to the deprivations inherent in being completely alone for so long a time, and called specific attention to suicides that she learned of in her visits to women's prisons. This was in 1838. In pushing for reforms, the Quakers in Philadelphia in the early 1800s were very well-intentioned, and we know a lot about well-intentioned people. But they did learn from their mistakes, and the Quakers have been some of the most ardent supporters for an end to the use of solitary after it rose again, drastically increasing in the 1980s and 90s. Across religious traditions, upholding the inherent dignity of every person is a key commonality in opposing torture. Complete isolation violates basic religious values of redemption and compassion and restorative justice. And in our Christian tradition, we express that everyone is made in the image of God. And I would also invite you to consider that in our Trinitarian understanding of God, we have a model of community through which we can base humane alternatives to isolation. I'll note that the 2018 General Convention of the Episcopal Church passed a resolution. I've got the full wording up here, condemning the prolonged solitary confinement as a form of torture. And they cited the UN's Nelson Mandela rules that Jessica noted. And it calls on all Episcopalians, quote, to demand their governments and any use of prolonged solitary confinement in their prisons, jails, and detention centers, whether publicly run or contracted with private companies, and raise our concerns with human rights groups. This resolution references both passages from Hebrews 3 about remembering those who are tortured as though you yourself are being tortured, and also the parable of the sheep and the goats from Matthew 25, which I referenced in my prayer earlier and is one of my own guiding scriptures. Christ says that when we visit those who are imprisoned, we are visiting him. And likewise, Jesus was tortured unto death at the hands of the state. And when we take action on behalf of those enduring psychological torture at the hands of the state, it is though we are taking action for Jesus. And there are a lot of ways that we can take action. Some have already been mentioned. I'll lift up a few others. You can become a pen pal with someone who is in solitary through the organization Solitary Watch has a pen pal program where they act as an intermediary and do the mailing for the exchange of letters. You can join Interfaith Action for Human Rights, a group here in Maryland advocating for change, or in DC, the Unlock the Box DC Coalition, and also that has legislation in the City Council. And certainly, if you've been motivated at all today, let your friends and family in other states know about this. Unlock the Box is supporting campaigns in 23 states, and you can learn more about those on their website. You can lift prayers, share social media posts. If you or someone that you know has spent time in solitary confinement, you're invited to join NEARCAT's National Network of Solitary Survivors. And finally, I'll note that you can take a sticker or a button and just help to build awareness, put it on your laptop, your water bottle. People might ask questions. My wife has a NEARCAT t-shirt that she said she wore to work this week, and the name of the organization is the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. And one of her coworkers said, "Well, who's for it?" And it opened an opportunity for conversation. So thank you.
We'd like to take questions now. So we'll hand you a mic if you have a question.
Hello, I'm Margaret Barry. And it's not so much a question, Mr. Wilson, as kind of alarm that the governor would say to you that he didn't know what was happening in the prisons, because he's had his own representatives testify against the legislation to limit solitary. So I wouldn't let him off that easy when you talk with him next.
Yes, yeah, I agree, yes.
Okay, because this is, it's serious. I mean, people, the thing that happens with prisons is that we, as communities, look the other way. Well, they must deserve it.
Yeah.
Let happen what's going to happen. And I take it as a personal responsibility that what is being done in my name in our prisons is something I have to follow up on. I feel responsible for. Solitary shouldn't exist. And the treatment of people within prisons, the dehumanization that is institutionalized in prisons, should not be done in our names. And so I really ask people to reach out to the governor, reach out to your representatives, and keep on this, because it's too easy to look the other way.
Yes, absolutely.
Hello. I'm just want to see if I can get some clarity on some of the language, because at one point it sounds like we're fighting against solitary confinement being used as torture, and on another side, it's solitary confinement is torture. Okay. So is it that we're pushing back against the use of solitary confinement as torture, or all solitary confinement is torture? And I was just trying to get clarity on that.
Semantics.
Yeah.
Anybody want to take that one first?
I mean, I think it's all of the above. Like solitary confinement is torture, and that's what we're pushing to eradicate. Just we shouldn't do it. And it's being used as a tool, as a weapon for people who are incarcerated. We just shouldn't do it. Like, it just doesn't make sense. It's never worked, and it damages people forever.
Chris, can you tell us a little bit about what it was like for you as a 14-year-old boy to spend over 100 days in solitary? I mean, was there a window in your cell? Did you ever get out every day?
Paint a picture.
Yeah, well, you're supposed to get out for like an hour a day for like a shower or walk into another like outdoor caged in space. But depending on staffing, you might get out. And so for me, on average, I would get out of my cell for an hour for a shower every 3 to 4 days, maybe. But sometimes you just don't get out. And it was very difficult for me, especially since I didn't even do anything to be in solitary confinement. But I had a family member who was killed, and I was crying when I got off the phone, and boom, solitary confinement. You are considered a danger to yourself and maybe others, and so we got to put you in solitary confinement. Didn't understand it. They give you different food. You know, we had like these loaves that was disgusting, and it's like, you hungry, you got to eat it. Gnats, bugs, all of these things. And so I spent most of my time with a sheet over myself, and I would just curl up so the bugs couldn't get on me. And that was it. And it was just strange sounds, people screaming and keys, clinking, and like that was it. And then just so imagine that during the summertime, all day, every day, no letters, no visits. It was. I still think about it, and even to talk about it and be involved in this campaign is just triggering. But it's important because there's tens of thousands of people that are going through it right now, including children. Like, what is that? Like, who are we? What does that say about us that we allow it to happen? And then say, all right, well, you broke the law. Get over it. You'll be okay. No. This is, they call it corrections, but we're not correcting anything.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you for coming and thank you for sharing your story. So I have a question about the legislative advocacy. And I'm sorry, I came in a little late, so maybe this was addressed, but so it sounds like, there are bills, there's advocacy to be done. But also like some of these things that you're talking about being put in solitary confinement, based on a look, they seem, and I'm not very well read up on this, but they seem illegal to me. And I wonder, are there any like class action, like, is there an ability to bring a class action lawsuit to like, at least, have an injunction on some kinds of these like triggers that get people put in solitary confinement that just don't seem like they should be happening?
Yes, so we do have pretty good case law. There's class action suits happening right now. It is only one small part of a strategy, to be honest. Like, the legal field and the lawyers that we work with will always say, like, the law is not like gonna get us out of this. So it has to be, like I was saying before, and maybe you missed this, is that the legislation that we have passed is likely going to have to be litigated to be implemented because they're refusing to do it. It's too early to tell right now because the implementation in these 4 states is still pretty early. But in New York, for example, it's being litigated. And there are class action lawsuits on conditions, on the health, solitary, you name it, people have died. There's, lawsuits that their families have brought. So it's all part of the strategy, but it isn't going to get us out of the problem in and of itself.
I just thought I'd mention, I'm coming. I think in England, there's a limit of 45 days for solitary. And if you want to extend it, you have to go outside the prison system to a higher authority. So it's interesting to look internationally.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, is there just aren't any standards. So the standard operating procedures in these jails and prisons, contraband can be a lot of things. And it's at their discretion. And that's the problem with having these kinds of opaque systems. There's just no transparency.
Hi, my name is Jessica Banthan. The opposition comes in part, or maybe mostly, from corrections officers and their unions. Has there been any possibility of negotiating with some of them or working with some of them to find compromises or ways in which correction officers can feel like they have tools to remain safe and maintain safety that don't include solitary confinement? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so one of our partners, Amend, they operate out of the University of California, San Francisco University, and they are really our partner in what we call prison culture shift change. And the culture change aspect is one of the most difficult pieces. And so those folks are taking correctional leaders and correctional staff to Norway to do a cultural exchange, to see that you can in fact have deep and meaningful relationships with people who are incarcerated, that you're in charge of their safety, that you can create a dynamic security system in which nobody has to be shackled because you've gained the trust and understanding between each other. There are lots of strategies in which other countries use that we do not, because we are strictly a punitive, not rehabilitative system. And some of these other countries have taken it on as a challenge to be rehabilitative, and what they call building better neighbors. Because what Chris said is absolutely right. People are coming home, and then what? It makes it a public safety issue, not just a prison safety issue. And you all should understand that the walls in prison are very porous. There is not anything that doesn't happen in prisons, doesn't happen in our communities, and vice versa. And we learned that lesson again during COVID. And so, people come home and people go in, and we have to deal with the idea that that people in these facilities that work there are trained to torture people. And so, yes, that's happening. It is a long haul. And there are, frankly, just people who draw the line at solitary because they want to use it. And so you're right, it has become a one-sided issue. The who's for it is the question. We know we've won the moral argument, but we have not won the political one.
One more question, Margaret.
Oh, okay. Yes, here in Maryland, has a bill been introduced similar to that New York law?
Yes.
Did it get out of committee? What's the status? Has it been introduced for a few years and still is not moving forward? Is that it?
Correct.
Ah,
You got it. On the
okay.
nose.
Too bad. All right, we know what to advocate for.
Yeah, if you all sign up either for St. John's or for the Unlock the Box piece, anything Maryland related will come your way for this new legislative session.
I think it's time to end. The panelists are here if you want to talk to them. I urge you to look at the unlocktheboxcampaign.org website. There's a tremendous 8-minute video on that. It says, "Have you seen this yet?" And it gives you a sense, among other things, of the horrible sounds and the screams and the constant noise in solitary. And it ends, a man's giving testimony in Congress. He was in solitary for 18 years. And he said he's just a ruined man. He can't sleep more than an hour. He cries continuously during the day. It was just, it was hell. I think I'd go out of my mind. Thank you very much for coming.